Good morning. Hope everyone's having a great day. It is Thursday, March 14th, I believe, 2024. Hope everyone's having a fantastic year. One thing I'm going to mention right off the bat here is that I have a goal this year to really dedicate more time in creating more videos for this channel. EFT has been a significant tool for me in my life, in many different areas of my life. I've worked with clients who've had tremendous success with EFT. I know lots of others who've used EFT just on their own and have had tremendous success. And so I'd really like to spend more time getting more videos out there. So I'm committing to putting out weekly videos from this point forward, moving forward. We're going to crush it. Let's create greatness together, right? No matter what your goals are, your aspirations, your objectives, let's do it together. Because you're more powerful than you even think you are. And remember that, because it's true. All right. So I got my coffee here. It's delicious. I was out this morning as the sun was coming up. Turkeys were gobbling. Got that spring-like weather moving in. It's beautiful. I love it. But the purpose of this video is about the SUDS scale and how important it is when working with EFT, working on different issues, especially multifaceted issues that could have many different aspects. And if you're not familiar with the SUDS scale, it's an acronym that stands for the Subjective Unit of Distress Scale. So it's a scale from 0 to 10. It's a great way to subjectively give yourself a rating on where you are from 0 to 10 on an issue. 10 being the most intense, most emotionally intense rating, and a 0 being essentially no issue at all, no emotional intensity. So think of it like this. You're angry about something on a scale of 0 to 10. How angry are you? How much are you feeling that? Is it a 5? Is it an 8? Is it a 10, right? Is it a 20? And it could be used for essentially any sort of tapping, especially on negative issues, limiting beliefs, fears, phobias, any sort of negative aspect that you're going to work on, any sort of pressing issue. The SUD scale can be used, right? It could be an anxiety about a situation or a circumstance, right? On a scale 0 to 10, how much anxiety are you feeling? How intense is it right now when you think about it, right? It could be an old trauma or memory that you're going to tap on. When you think about the situation or the circumstance on a scale 0 to 10, how much is that impacting you? Now, you might be asking, okay, well, that sounds good, but how do I come up with the number, right? How do I associate a number with how I feel? Well, the beautiful thing is there's no hard, fast rules to this. And when I first started tapping back in 2017, I remember thinking, well, I don't know. I don't know what the number is. Is it a 5 or is it a 7? So it may take a little bit getting used to because it is subjective. And the only meaning it has is the meaning you give to it. So the way I like to do it when I personally use the SUD scale in my own tapping is I let the number just intuitively come to me. And I became better at this over time. I used to kind of question the number that would come up initially, which we have a tendency to do, is just question what our intuition comes up with. But I found over time that by just letting that number come to me, that was the number I'm starting with. So let's say I was, working on something with anger. Well, how angry am I about this specific situation, this person, this circumstance, on a scale to 0 to 10? And I would just let that number come to me. Now, the way it comes to me is it appears in my mind, like I literally see a number. It'll just pop up before I have a chance to really think about it. It'll be like a 7. Now, the goal is when you let that number come to you, is don't question it, don't challenge it, don't try to change it or give more meaning than is necessary to that number. Just let that number come up. All right. So ask yourself the question, right? I'm going to tap on this issue. And it's with the SUD scale, you want to be as specific as possible. Maybe you're feeling anxiety and you want to tap on anxiety. You could do a general tapping on anxiety, right? You could do a follow along video. You could do it on your own. But why are you feeling that anxiety? And maybe you don't know, but you got to get very specific about it. I'm feeling this anxiety about this person, this situation, this presentation I have to do. I'm feeling social anxiety because I have a social gathering coming. It could be anything. Or I don't know why I'm feeling this anxiety right now, but I feel it. Okay, where do I feel it? I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my throat. What type of color is it? If you had to give it a color, what color is that anxiety? Well, it's a red. It's a red hot anxiety, right? So be very specific. Okay. And then ask yourself, what is my rating on the SUD scale? Oh, it's a 7. I feel pretty intense about this. It's at 7. Now, one of the important recommendations I make to people is to write it down. Have a journal. It's so powerful and impactful when you write down what your issue is. You do your SUD scale rating. You write the number down, right? You write down anything else that's coming up for you, even before you start tapping, right? Maybe there's some thoughts, memories, emotions, just write them down. And if you have multiple things coming up, it could be really powerful to give a SUDS rating for each issue, memory, emotion that comes up, okay? Write it all down. Then start your tapping. Tap through a round and stop and ask yourself, all right, where am I at on the SUD scale? Has that number changed? Oh, you know what? It's more like a 5 now. It was a 7, now it's a 5. I'm feeling some relief. Okay? So it's important to use this SUD scale. You don't have to use it for every single time you tap, but if you're going to work on things that are really bothering you, if you're going to work on old trauma, old limiting beliefs that have been lingering around for a really long time, it can be very powerful to use the SUD scale. It could help you make progress where you're not seeing progress because you're giving yourself a rating and you're seeing if it's going to move or not. If it's not moving, you're still feeling the same intensity after you do tapping and tapping and tapping, it still isn't changing, maybe even going up, then there's a good possibility it's a multifaceted issue with multiple aspects. Maybe you're not being specific enough and you got to work on each one. And sometimes it's good to work with a practitioner in that case where there's a lot of aspects coming up, you're not making any progress, the SUD scaling dropping, but typically just tapping on your own, being specific, doing the tapping, writing it down, you can make tremendous amounts of progress on your own without working with anyone, just working with yourself. But just be honest with yourself. Don't challenge whatever the number is that comes up, right? Just let it come to you and then work through the tapping, okay? Now, why is this important? Well, number one, we kind of covered it already. There's a specificity that you're giving to it, right? This is a subjective thing. And again, the only meaning behind it is the meaning that you give to it. So you're being honest with yourself. You're letting your subconscious mind tell you what that intensity rating is, and you're working with it, right? It's a way to see progress with EFT tapping, okay? So that's one good reason to use it. Another good reason is if you're writing it down, you're able to look back and see certain things. You might have certain things that you take care of now, but maybe a few months or a year from now, something similar comes up. You could look back at some of the issues you dealt with. What were some of the scores? What were some of the things coming up for you that you wrote down? How much progress did you make with your EFT tapping, right? Now, a second thing that is important for using the SUD scale is a lot of times people they'll start tapping, and just the tapping alone, you tend to feel calmer. You tend to feel pretty good, even after one round, especially if you do multiple rounds. You're just feeling good. And maybe the issue doesn't seem as intense. But a lot of times people stop tapping too soon. So they may have started working on an issue that had a pretty high intensity level, let's say an 8 or a 9 or whatever. And then after a few rounds, maybe they've gotten down to, let's say, a 4 or 5, and they're feeling really good, but they haven't been keeping track of where they're at. They've just been tapping kind of in the moment, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I do that too. I do a lot of tapping where I'm not getting a SUDS rating at all. But let's say if you did take your SUDS rating, let's say you're at a 4 or 5, there's still something there that needs to be worked on. And if you give up now, because you're feeling pretty good, right? Because you were tapping, you're sending some, nice signals to your brain when you're tapping. You're chilling out. You're getting that the parasympathetic response from your brain. You're tapping into the amygdala. So there's a lot of physiological things happening when you're tapping, regardless of the issue you're tapping on. But if you stop too soon, then you haven't completely collapsed the issue, even though you may feel like you have. But if you were to ask yourself, where am I now? And I'm at a 4 or 5, you want to keep going. I say you want to keep going until you're at least under a 3, like a 1 or a 2 or a 0. That's the best thing to do, because then you're really collapsing these issues. Even if you're still at a 3, you might want to still work on it. But you really want to collapse these things so that there's permanent change within you, right? So that's another good reason to use the SUD scale. You might be feeling pretty good, but when you ask yourself, your mind might say, no, we're still at a 6. We started at a 10, but we're at a 6. That's great progress, but you're not done yet. You got to keep going, okay? Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about, and probably one of the most important reasons to use the SUD scale, is the apex effect. Now, the apex effect is a well-known effect with EFT tapping that's very interesting and kind of spooky, something I've experienced, something that a lot of people experience. Now, what the apex effect is, the easiest way for me to explain it is, if you ever watched Men in Black, remember when normal everyday citizens would have some sort of run-in with the aliens, and then the Men in Black would show up, find out what's going on, and then they would pull out, I forget what they called it, this device. They would put on their sunglasses, they'd hit the button on the device, there was like a flash, and then all the people that were involved in this situation where they saw some aliens or had some sort of experience with aliens, they completely forgot the experience. And then the Men in Black would just tell them something like, oh, what you saw, what you witnessed was some sort of weather thing, and right, they would give them a story. That's essentially what happens with the apex effect. So EFT is so powerful a lot of times that you might start tapping on an issue that's very problematic for you, maybe something that's been bothering you for years, and you successfully, my dog's kicking the floor, scratching his belly. Anyway, so you may start with an issue that's really been bothering you for a long time, some sort of limiting belief or emotional issue, and you tap through it, maybe several rounds on your own, maybe with a practitioner, maybe with a group of people, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you may get to a point where you've had such tremendous progress and completely collapse this issue to the point where you forget what you were even working on, what you were tapping on, what even bothered you. A lot of times you'll have a faint memory of what it was, almost like a dream, like it's just a hazy memory of what you were working on, but you minimize how much it impacted you. You pretty much come out saying, well, yeah, that wasn't, I'm glad I finally let that go. And a lot of times people will minimize it so much they don't even give credit to the tapping for helping collapse the issue. And they'll just say, oh, yeah, that was sort of like a problem. I sort of remember that, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. And the reason that happens is because you've done such a great job at releasing that energy, collapsing that issue, rewiring your mind, your brain, your behavior around this issue, that you are literally a different person and you have a different perspective on it. And the only proof you have that it was actually a serious issue that you were dealing with initially was if you wrote it down and gave yourself a SUD score. Because then you would look back at that and be like, oh, wow, I had this issue with anxiety for years that I wrote down, and I rated it as a 10, but I don't really remember feeling that intense about it. then it gives you more of a realization of how powerful tapping is. And this happens all the time with people. It's happened with me as well. Sometimes people totally forget what the issue even was. Sometimes people, it's more of a faint memory. But without tracking of the SUDS rating, you never know how intense it might have been. So it's just a good reminder, because you know that the technique you were using, the EFT tapping, worked, and it was powerful, maybe instantaneous, and usually it is permanent. So it's very good idea to use the SUDS scale, especially with these multifaceted issues, intense issues, these issues that lingered on for years, decades, maybe since childhood. Track it, write it down. If you're working with a practitioner, they're going to be probably writing it down for you. They might have you write it down, but they're going to remind you, hey, this is the apex effect. You're minimizing how much intensity this was on you in the beginning, how emotionally charging this was for you. You've completely eliminated it, and your memories even changed on it. But remember, we started at a 10 and worked our way down. At some point, you completely transitioned away from it. And that's great. That's what we want. And so do you need this reminder with the SUDS scale? No, not necessarily, but you may not do as much tapping because you've essentially forgotten that you even tapped on it. You've forgotten what the issue was. You've completely, it's like a memory that's completely disappeared, or it's just a faint memory, like an old dream that you can barely remember. So this video is turning into a long video, but those three things are very important for the SUDS scale. It's good for tracking your progress to see how much of an impact the EFT is making, right? It's good for looking back, right? If you are tracking in a notebook, you could look at it if similar things come up in the future, right? Just for tracking purposes, reminders. And then, of course, the apex effect, where you could be totally eliminating issues, which is the goal, but you want to at least remember how you did it, which was the EFT tapping. And so you want to use the SUDS scale to show and demonstrate where you were and where you ended up. So try using the SUDS scale if you haven't. Most practitioners are going to use it with you. And best of luck out there. Keep tapping. All right, we'll see you guys. Thanks.